Hello, I'm Sheryl McCarthy of the City University of New York. Welcome to One to One. Each week we address issues of timely and timeless concern with newsmakers and the journalists who report on them, with artists, scientists, educators, social scientists, and government leaders. We meet each one to one. I'm delighted to welcome State Senator Liz Krueger to the program. Her district stretches from 19th Street to 103rd Street, from the East River to 8th Avenue, Murray Hill, Midtown, including Times Square, the Upper East Side, Central Park, and the American Museum of Natural History. Her constituents include the very young and the very old, the impoverished and the incredibly rich, native New Yorkers and immigrants from all over the globe. She addresses their concerns as she copes with the politics of Albany. And what a difference a year makes. Since she was on the program last, we've elected the first Black president, a former First Lady has become Secretary of State, and New York has a new senator most downstaters had never heard of before. Welcome.
Thank you.
According to a recent Marist poll, the results were in today's newspaper, 68% of registered voters in New York think something that needs to be drastic change in the state government, and 10% say it's unfixable. How is now there's been all kinds of upheaval. How is the state government functioning now?
Not nearly as well as it should. So it doesn't really surprise me that such a large number of people are demanding better from Albany and change in Albany. And I have to tell you, I support them in that. We've had a horrendous year for a variety of reasons, and there's been a great deal of press exposure of some of the problems up there. And I guess I'll start by saying, good, let people see the problems in Albany. Let them demand better. That's the only way we're going to get a better government.
Let's start with the past few months in Albany, which have brought us a lot of political lunacy. What was the lowest moment for you?
I suppose the lowest moment for me was on June 8th when two Democrats, without anyone knowing or having foreknowledge, did not announce on the floor of the Senate. They had secretly negotiated with the Republicans in the Senate to, quote unquote, create a coup and to give their votes to the Republican conference, and then did we still believe, an illegal resolution on the floor to shift the power from the Democratic Party to the Republican Party.
So that these two senators could have
leadership positions. And the irony, of course, for me was the Republicans had controlled the New York State Senate since 1939, and we had only finally taken control for the Democratic Party in January of this year. And within a few short months, a few senators who didn't feel like they were getting everything they wanted from the Democratic Party decided to sell their allegiance to the Republicans and shift the balance of power. Now that led to a 5-week standoff that I have nicknamed coup, counter-coup, post-coup, post-traumatic stress syndrome, where we all are now trying to figure out how we move forward as a functioning body, knowing we have an incredibly close statistical margin between the two parties, currently 32 Democrats, 30 Republicans. We have a lot of explaining, every one of us, to do to the public, and we have to get through another very difficult legislative year given the economics and the demands on us.
Now, you talk about those two renegade Democratic senators who were Pedro Espada and Hiram Montserrat.
Correct.
Was it all about them, or was it partly about weakness on behalf of Malcolm Smith, who was the Democratic majority leader in the Senate? Was it that you had a weak governor? What allowed all of this to happen?
There's always Monday morning quarterbacks, and so I think that people are saying, you should have seen this could happen and done something about it before it did. And I think the answer is yes, except exactly what you should have known and what you could have done is a little more ethereal. So these two men who, in fact, sold their allegiance, were in fact part of a group of 4 senators who back in December, before we even took power, had threatened to go to the Republicans and prevent the Democrats from taking the majority. They had made a list of demands like blackmailers. They had actually accidentally given the list of demands to the New York Times, who published it. And in fact, the public all knew, and we all knew, they were attempting to hold us hostage for their votes for a Democratic leadership back in December. Some of their demands were met, and in fact, they stayed with the Democratic conference. Now, you can say, well, nobody should have agreed to do anything for them then. Let them go to the Republicans. There would have continued to be Republican control until such time as the Democrats, with a quality group of legislators, really could take control of the Senate, and we wouldn't have faced June, but we wouldn't have been in power. Others said it was the right thing for Malcolm Smith to make the agreement with that original Gang of 4 and to, in fact, take over the majority. And, in fact, the Democrats very proudly did some very important things in the first few months that we were in office. But that nonetheless, having made that deal, what's the lesson you learn from doing business with blackmailers? They always come back for more. So they did. And these two, when not satisfied, on June 8th, pulled the action they did, and they, quote-unquote, temporarily cooed, throwing the Senate into helter-skelter in the last few weeks of the session. And that's what's also so important about this, the timing. The last few weeks of each legislative session is when the vast majority of legislative work bills get passed. Mm-hmm. So June 8th, we were technically supposed to end session June 22nd or 23rd. So the most, quote-unquote, productive period of the year for the Senate simply was a chaos period. Mm-hmm. And we did not accomplish what we were supposed to. The public got angry. The press got angry. The pressure built. You have to do something. You have to get these bills done. Counties are waiting for their tax bills. New York City's school governance bill sunsetted without being acted upon. Pressure, pressure, pressure. So, in fact, under that pressure, eventually a deal was made. These two returned to the Democrats. And we have now just started to pull ourselves together to try to go forward.
And Espada is now the majority leader, correct?
He has the name majority leader, but it's very important for people to understand we changed legally the rules of the Senate such that the majority leader is a title with a much, much smaller portfolio.
Okay.
He is not the leader of the Senate Democrats. Okay. He was not elected by anyone. This is an appointed position by the Democratic leadership. So he can be unappointed at any time, and the power that historically has rested with the majority leader has been removed.
Now, after all of this, now that Espada and Montserrat are back in the Democratic camp, aren't their colleagues furious with them? I mean,
Absolutely. Yes.
How is that relationship playing out now after all of that?
It's very complex and very delicate. Speaking for myself, I'm absolutely furious. I took the position that we shouldn't actually allow them back. We should go into the minority until such time as we have real Democrats who truly want to govern New York State and work in the best interests of people. Now, I think I will accomplish my goals with that fairly soon for a variety of reasons. Senator Montserrat, of course, is on trial as we speak, and may, in a very short period of time, if convicted of a felony, have to step down from his seat. Then we'll have a special election and get a new, I believe, Democratic senator. Senator Espada, if you pick up a newspaper any day, there's a new expose, a new scandal brewing, a new investigation. Of course, political corruption cases take a very long time.
Should there be a change in the way those cases are handled? I mean, if senators are brought up on ethical or criminal charges, I mean, should they be suspended with pay? while those charges are investigated? What do you think?
You know, it's not a simple answer, Sheryl, and I've thought a lot about this. One, only the voters of your district decide whether or not you continue in office, with a few exceptions under the law currently. If you are convicted of a felony, you cannot continue to serve in the state Senate or Assembly. Some people have talked about expanding that definition of no longer being eligible to serve, but actually when you look into it, you always bump up against the what is the will of the people. Mm-hmm. Should the legislature be allowed to refuse people the right to serve when they have been duly elected by the majority of voters in their district? There was a case back, I believe it was at the early 1900s, that a person was elected to the New York State Senate and he was refused being allowed to be seated by the Senate because he was a member of the Socialist Party. Well, I hear that and think, well, I wouldn't want to be a member of the Socialist Party, but if the voters elect someone who's a member of the Socialist Party, how dare the parties in power say you can't sit? Right. And so it's a very slippery slope. Mm-hmm. Although I do believe that there should and we must figure out a way to have higher standards for being an elected official. I mean, the irony for me is sometimes I think, oh, the only requirement for being elected is, yet to be convicted of a felony. And that's completely unacceptable. I've thought about, how can we increase the standards and tests before someone can get on the ballot? We have petitions now in New York State. You have to get X number of people's signature before you can run. Well, maybe instead of expecting 10,000 signatures, get 50 signatures of people who will verify they know you and you are good and you are of good moral character. That might be a lot tougher for some of us than 10,000 strangers. Mm-hmm. There should be perhaps a police check and review for everyone who wants to run for public office. If you want to be a commissioner at the state or city level, or even appointed to a non-paying board, we make you go through a very, very detailed review of who you are, and that's not even to be an elected official. So maybe the same standards we have for being appointed to a position should be applied to those who are running for office as well.
Interesting. We're going to take a short break. We'll be back after this message.
Did you know CUNY leads the way for students with disabilities?
CUNY Leads means linking employment, academics, and disability services. If you're a CUNY student with a visible or invisible disability, the City University of New York offers eligible students free career development and placement services. To find out if you qualify, visit cuny.edu/CUNYLeads. CUNY Leads, to the career I always wanted.
Welcome back to One to One. I'm Sheryl McCarthy of the City University of New York, talking with State Senator Liz Krueger of Manhattan. We've been talking about the Gang of Two. Let's talk about Governor Paterson. What's your assessment? He's been criticized. He's gotten a lot of bad press in recent months. What's your assessment of his ability to govern and how he's doing?
Well, I think David Paterson's been having a hard time. And I will start with pointing out, he had to take over in a minute's notice when Eliot Spitzer stepped down as governor, and he had to take over in one of the most difficult economic times this state has seen really since the Great Depression. So I think that David jumped into the job knowing there were enormous sort of pitfalls in front of him, and that he had a huge learning curve moving from lieutenant governor to governor. Having said that, I wouldn't give him such great grades so far. It's very difficult to govern. I understand that. And it's not right to throw stones. I've never tried to be the governor of New York State. But my frustration is we need to make some tough decisions rapidly in New York State. We need to be changing the direction of the ship. And I don't see enough new ideas coming out of the governor's chamber and enough direction of both where the legislature is going and where the state needs to go. So I am hoping that David has a better 2010 because we still have an unbelievable economic budget deficit situation to deal with. We have huge numbers of serious public policy decisions to make. If the federal government changes health care policy, and I hope it does, and I hope it's dramatic and important, that will require New York State to immediately reevaluate all of our health care policies and health insurance policies. And so we will need to be very active, very fast.
Is it a lack of vision, a lack of toughness? Is it a personality thing? What is it that you haven't gotten from the governor that you need?
You know, it's so hard to, evaluate individuals, especially putting in the context of where they are in history and in time. I do think, it's my personal opinion, that the job description of an executive, mayor, president, governor is to have to make a large number of tough decisions in rapid, over and over again. Each day you wake up and have to make tough, rapid decisions. And you also have to, unfortunately, piss off a lot of people because you're making all those decisions each day. There are some personalities that are a good match for that. Ironically, we in New York City seem to love hard-boiled mayors. Right. Because, all right, tough decisions have to be made. This guy can do it. We question whether anybody's capable of being mayor if they don't have a certain set of personality traits. I'm not sure being governor is that different a job description.
Right.
David is an extremely bright, extremely bright, extremely thoughtful person who wants to factor in all the sides, who wants to be deliberative, and that, in fact, is a model of a legislator,
but not of a governor.
But not always as a governor, and I
Okay.
think that's one of the things that has been part of the learning curve for him, realizing it's a different job description.
In a recent column, the Daily News' Errol Lewis, he alluded to the governor's very low ratings in the polls. But he also said he felt that the Governor Paterson is not getting credit for some things that he's done. He called him the most progressive governor in decades. He's raised taxes on the wealthy, championed same-sex marriage, raised the basic welfare grant for the first time in 18 years. The Rockefeller drug laws have finally been totally reformed, made good use of federal stimulus money for programs such as the $200 back-to-school grants for low-income families. Should he get more credit for those things, or?
Yes, I think that's an excellent list. And in fact, I would throw in that if the Democrats hadn't been in control of the Senate from January through June, many of those things could not have happened on a Republican governor or under a Republican-controlled Senate. Last week, we went back to session, and everybody said, oh, no, now what's going to happen? They're back. Well, in a 12-hour period, we passed a green jobs bill, which will create 14,000 jobs in new technology, be able to retrofit homes and businesses, creating economic activity and cleaning up our environment. Now, the Republicans would never have passed that bill. We passed it, and I know the governor will sign it. We passed a clinic access bill that has passed the Assembly year after year and was never going to pass a democratically controlled Senate. A Republican-controlled Senate, because it's an anti-choice party, even in New York State in 2009. And I know the governor is going to sign that bill. So yes, David Paterson absolutely should be given credit, and people should recognize that Democratic control of the Senate, in conjunction with David Paterson as the governor, have in fact accomplished a great deal. Not to mention, of course, you said the Rockefeller drug laws. 35 years of everyone knowing it was completely failed policy, and yet only this year did we finally accomplish that. Again, David as governor and a democratically controlled Senate.
Yesterday's primary, I have received more campaign literature, been approached with more petitions, received more campaign phone calls than in any race, local, state, or national that I can remember. And yet, voter turnout was, I think, maybe the lowest ever. What was going on?
It's a great question. It's a combination of things. One, the mayor's race as a primary was a known outcome. With all due respect, most people believe that Bill Thompson would win the Democratic primary by a landslide, which he did. And so that wasn't motivating people to come out to the polls. Most people still aren't sure what a public advocate or a controller do. So despite the fact that there were very talented candidates pouring mail into your mailbox and TV commercials and robocalls, still for a significant number of people, getting out there for a primary for this thing called public advocate and this thing called controller were not top on their list. And only in a certain number of city council districts were there really competitive primaries. So partly the answer is because of public financing, which I support with a 6-to-1 match, there was significant amount of money available to a large number of candidates, right? They were well-funded candidates because of public financing, and there were lots of them. So they were, in fact, pouring mail into your mailbox, telephone, robocalls. I got so many complaints from people about them. No one likes them.
Right.
We all seem to use them because they're cheap, but no one likes them. And TV ads. And yet, clearly, the majority of voters in this city, they sort of looked at the mail, watched the TV, picked up or didn't pick up the phone, and said, there's really nothing motivating me to get out to the polls yesterday. And you know what? It's a shame. So we're doing a lot of good work in New York City through public financing to give more people opportunities to run, a more even playing field. I have to tell you, I think there were some very qualified candidates running against each other yesterday. But at the end of the day, we haven't really captured the voters' attention. So I would argue we're doing something wrong. We need to revisit that question.
In the past, all the business in Albany was accomplished by 3 men. It was the 3 men in the room.
So it was called.
It was the Speaker of the Assembly, it was the State Majority Leader, and the Governor. Is that still the case, or has that changed, or is that in the process of changing?
I think it's still in the process of changing. For one, it has been expanded more to be 5 people in the room, the minority leader of each house as well. Still statistically men. You know, we have another glass ceiling to get through. There are not women in leadership positions in Albany. And it's the great state of New York, and it's 2009. So we need to get more women involved in government and more women involved in moving up the ladder to leadership. But we have not changed the formula yet, that it's still leader-driven. Now, one good thing that came out of our Senate coup was we did change the rules of the Senate. We have empowered far more the rank and file individual members to be able to actually move bills to the floor. We have empowered both the minority.
That's a big deal.
It's a big deal. We've empowered the minority to also have a greater role, more equal distribution of resources, more sharing of resources as far as committees, where we will actually be able to have real committee process with everyone having a role and be able to amend bills and go back and forth, much more like a congressional model. So I do have some optimism that we can continue to move forward with good changes for how the legislature works. Now, the Senate changing the way it works, I hope, in fact, will lead to the Assembly changing how it works. But you know what I always said about sort of a leader-driven Senate or Assembly? We, the members, give that power to our leaders. So we have to be the ones who say, no, we don't like that model. There are 212 legislators, 150 assembly members, 62 senators. There's 19 million people in New York State. 3 men, or if we ever saw 3 women, shouldn't be making all the decisions for 19 million New Yorkers. That's a bad model. So we have to take power back for ourselves as the legislatures, both houses, and deliver a more democratic, small d, government for all 19 million New Yorkers.
Liz, in the 1 minute that we've got left, in what area or areas do you see the most pressing needs for state legislation?
Well, right now, our biggest pressure is that we're going to face a multi-billion budget deficit in the coming year. Some of that, of course, is the reality of the economy, but some of it is structural. We have, for too long, ignored the fact that we have an imbalance between our demands of government service and our tax policies. So why I'm always telling people I want to make tax policy sexy. It's very hard to convince people of that. If we don't have an equitable tax system and a fair 21st century tax system, we lose on both ends. The people lose when we don't have the government services we need: education, health care, public protection, mass transit. But the state loses if we don't support businesses to come and grow and create more jobs in New York State.
Right.
So I actually think both parts of that assignment are the biggest challenges we're facing in New York.
Okay. Our thanks to State Senator Liz Krueger for joining us today. For the City University of New York and 1 to 1, I'm Sheryl McCarthy.